Hey everybody, this is GGB, and today we're going to be doing college football playoff scenarios. I did this thing last year. Didn't get all that many views, but hoping for a difference this year since I have more subscribers. But this is a lot of fun. I do it every year. It's what happens if different teams win different championship games. And we'll start out with the most basic scenario possible. Georgia wins, Michigan wins, Cincy wins, Oklahoma State wins. This is an obvious one. Georgia gets the 1 seed, Michigan gets the 2 seed, Cincy gets the 3 seed, Oklahoma State gets the 4 seed. I like this mainly because this is what I'm rooting for. This is what I really want to happen because, you know, in years past, I've been really for chaos. I want as much chaos as possible around the playoffs. This year, I'm not for as much chaos simply because a lot of these teams getting in would be fun. It would be Michigan's first time in. It would be Cincinnati's first time in the playoffs. It would be Oklahoma State's first time in the playoffs. We would be getting a whole bunch of new faces. And Georgia's only made the playoffs once before. I want new faces. And with chaos, we would only get old faces. That would be chaos-wise. But we'll get onto more chaotic as the scenarios go on. But let's go to scenario 2, and this is a very possible scenario as well. Alabama wins the SEC championship game against Georgia, and that would definitely be disappointing for a lot of fans. Michigan wins the Big Ten championship, Cincinnati wins the American championship, and Oklahoma State wins the Big 12 championship. This is scenario 2. Obviously, Alabama would become the 1 seed. I understand. Michigan's 2, they're ahead of Alabama in the polls, but Alabama would have a win over the number 1 team in the country in Georgia. So I think Alabama would hop Michigan here, and they would become the 1 seed. Then, this is the scenario. A lot of people are saying Georgia can't miss the playoffs. I think if they lose to Alabama and everyone else wins, they should miss the playoffs. I mean, I don't know how you keep out a 1-loss Big Ten champ in Michigan, a 0-loss American champ in Cincinnati, and a 1-loss Oklahoma State, a Big 12 champ in Oklahoma State. If all these things turn out, Michigan's obviously the 2 seed, Cincy's the 3 seed, and Oklahoma State's the 4 seed. Again, the only thing that really changes is instead of Georgia up there at the 1 seed, we get Alabama. So instead of Georgia and Oklahoma State, we get Alabama, Oklahoma State, which I think could be a lot of fun too. See, what's intriguing about the Georgia-Oklahoma State playoff matchup would simply be you get the number 1 defense versus the number 2 defense. And as someone who's a big fan of watching defenses play, that's a big selling point. But watching Alabama has not a great defense. That could allow for a lot of scoring. Spencer Sanders could get going, and we could see a very high-scoring game. I think that would be a lot of fun. And then looking at also the Michigan-Cincinnati game, I'd like to point out, I think this would be this is my favorite playoff match of all because I would love to see Cincinnati play Michigan, because we're talking about a Michigan team that has been phenomenal all year long, but there is a downside to that. Their quarterback is not a quarterback that can go win football games by himself. Desmond Ridder has an argument that he can do that. I think it's going to be really... That would be my favorite playoff matchup. I really want Michigan to play Cincinnati in the playoffs. Let's look at scenario 3. Alabama wins, and this is where chaos starts to happen. If Alabama wins and Iowa wins, Iowa upsets Michigan, and then Cincinnati wins and Oklahoma State wins. What do? I think the number 1 seed obviously stays Alabama. Cincinnati moves up to the 2 seed. Oklahoma State moves up to 3 seed, and then Georgia slips in at that 4 seed, and we get a rematch of the SEC championship game. Plus, I get to watch Cincinnati play Oklahoma State, which would also be a lot of fun. Cincinnati has not played a defense like Oklahoma State all year. Again, the closest they have come is against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame's defense actually did a really good job in that game. But Cincinnati has not played a defense like Oklahoma State's this year, and I would really like to see how that matchup would go. Scenario number 4. Alabama wins the SEC championship game. Michigan wins the Big Ten championship game. Houston wins the American championship, and Oklahoma State wins the Big 12. So obviously, Alabama stays the same. Michigan is the 2 seed then, and then the 3 seed would be Oklahoma State because they would move up because, again, Cincinnati would be ahead of them if they win. But if they lost, Oklahoma State now becomes the 3 seed, and we get Michigan, Oklahoma State, which would, again, be a lot of fun knowing both of these defenses. Michigan relies more on just pure talent. Oklahoma State's more well-coached, in my opinion, so I'd see who comes out on top there. And I think then, again, Georgia would slip into that 4 seed, and we get, again, a rematch of the SEC championship against Alabama and Georgia. That would be a lot of fun as well. Scenario 5. Moving on. Alabama wins. Michigan wins. Cincy wins. But then Baylor pulls off the upset in the Big 12 championship game, In that scenario, same thing basically. Number 1 seed's Alabama, 2 seeds Michigan, 3 seeds Cincinnati, and 4 seeds Georgia. Again, not a lot changes in this playoff scenario, but I think it's still a cool playoff scenario that I think could play out. It's very possible that this plays out. Scenario 6, I think, is obviously a little more or less plausible. I think we go into a little bit less plausible as the scenarios go on. This would be Alabama wins, Iowa wins the Big Ten championship, and Baylor wins the Big 12 championship, and Cincinnati also wins the American championship. In the scenario number 1, Alabama would be the 1 seed, Cincy would be the 2 seed. And then weirdly enough, Georgia would slip in at the 3 seed. So I think 3 seed's the highest we can really get Georgia. Although I think we could get maybe a no, I don't think so. Oh, actually, there is a scenario, where Georgia can get the 2 seed and have lost the SEC championship game. It's just not a very likely scenario in my opinion. I think Georgia gets the 3 seed and we get to see Georgia play Cincinnati, and then we get to see a rematch of last year's playoff game with Notre Dame. A lot of people forget about Notre Dame because they don't play a championship game this week, so they kind of slip off a lot of people's radars, but they are one of the few teams remaining that actually have a realistic playoff shot. Again, they only have 1 loss, and that 1 loss is to a Cincinnati team that is very good. So again, Cincinnati would have the tiebreaker over them, which means, I'll go over that later on in the video, but this would be a lot of fun. I think we get to see a better Notre Dame team than we did. Actually, I think this might be a worse Notre Dame team than we saw last year, but this would definitely be a worse Alabama team than we saw last year, so I think it could maybe even itself out. I don't think Notre Dame's going to give Alabama a real game, though. Scenario 7 is where we get some real chaos going on. Alabama wins the SEC championship game. Michigan wins the Big Ten championship game, but then Houston wins the American and Baylor wins the Big 12. So, again, not much changes here. You have Alabama as the 1 seed, Michigan as the 2 seed, because, again, they win. Georgia slips in as the 3 seed despite losing, right? Despite losing to Alabama, because, again, they would be a 1-loss football team. Their only loss is to the number 1 seed in Alabama. Again, they slip in as the 3 seed, and plus they have such a good track record over the past year. Here's where a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me. I would put Houston as the 4 seed ahead of Notre Dame, and I'll explain to you why. Okay, Notre Dame, I know it's not, equal, but, okay. Notre Dame lost to Cincinnati, right? Oh, Notre Dame lost to Cincinnati. So, who do you put in? A 1-loss Notre Dame team that didn't play in a championship game, or a 1-loss Cincinnati team that did play in a championship game, right? That they lost it. They would have the tiebreaker still, so I would put Cincinnati in ahead of Notre Dame. But how do you put a 1-loss Cincinnati team in ahead of Notre Dame that lost the conference championship instead of a 1-loss Houston team that beat that Cincinnati team and put in the conference and won the conference championship? I don't know, that maybe that's just me, but I feel like, maybe it's not even the college football playoff voters would agree with me, but just personally, I feel like Houston would deserve to be there. They, again, have not lost since week 1, and that's the second longest winning streak in the entire NCAA outside of Georgia in this scenario. This would be, again, Houston would have the longest win streak if the scenario was to play out because Georgia would have lost to Alabama. I just think you have to put Houston as at that 4 seed. Maybe it's just maybe. I mean, I don't even think they're rated that high. They're 20-something. But just in my personal opinion, I don't know how you leave out Houston in this scenario. Considering the way Houston has played, they would have beaten I think the number 4 team in the country in Cincinnati at that point. How do you leave out Houston in that scenario? I don't see it. I think you got to put in a 1-loss Houston team who has not lost since week 1. Oh, maybe that's just me. Scenario 8. Alabama wins the SEC. Iowa wins the Big 12. Houston wins the American, and Oklahoma State wins the Big 12. In that scenario, obviously, Alabama would be the 1 seed. Oklahoma State would become that 2 seed there, and then Georgia would become the 3 seed. And again, I still think Houston is that 4 seed. Personally, I feel like you take a 1-loss American champion over a 1-loss American champion loser, a 1-loss team that did not play in a championship game and also lost to the team that lost in the conference championship, and also don't think you take a 2-loss conference champion over a 1-loss Houston team. Maybe, again, that is just me, but that is what I think should happen. Scenario 9, Alabama wins. Iowa wins the Big Ten. Houston wins the American. Baylor wins the Big 12. Who gets in? Okay, this is one where a lot of people might disagree with me, but I feel like the SEC teams are the two top ones. You get Alabama at 1, Georgia at 2. That is what I think will happen if this scenario plays out. Again, don't think I'm a SEC lover. Again, I had Georgia out in one of these scenarios where Georgia doesn't make the playoffs. And I don't think anyone else has that. So I would put Alabama at 1, Georgia at 2. I think Houston would then be the 3 seed. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think Houston should then be the 3 seed because they have beaten Cincinnati, and Cincinnati beat Notre Dame. Again, I don't know. You can't really make those correlations that obvious, but I just feel like you can't put Cincinnati. You have to put Cincinnati ahead of Notre Dame even if they lose. And I don't know how you put Cincinnati in and not Houston, the team that just beat them. So again, I put Houston at 3, and I put Cincy as the 4 seed. I would think we would get 2 SEC teams, 2 American teams, which would be a very weird playoff scenario. Scenario number 10. Georgia wins the SEC championship. So we're going back to Georgia teams. Georgia wins the SEC championship. Iowa wins the Big Ten. Cincinnati wins the American. And Oklahoma State wins the Big 12. In this scenario, obviously, you get Georgia as the 1 seed, and you get Cincy as the 2 seed, and Oklahoma State as the 3 seed. That is obvious. Then, this is the first time I'll say it. Notre Dame... did I say it before? No, I did say it before in scenario 6, but Notre Dame was slipping as the 4 seed. Simply because it would have a 2-loss Big Ten champion. You can't take a 2-loss team if you have a 1-loss team available. Again, Notre Dame only makes it, though. You have to root, again, against... If you're a Notre Dame fan, I'll lay it out for you. You have to root for Cincy, because if Cincinnati loses, Houston gets in and Cincinnati ahead of you. So, you have to root for Cincy, in my opinion, and then you root for Michigan to lose or Oklahoma State to lose to Baylor. Those are the scenarios where you get in. Those teams have to lose for you to get into this playoffs. So Georgia against Notre Dame would be at least a little bit interesting. I think it'd be a tad interesting to watch Georgia beat up on Notre Dame. When I say interesting, I mean it's going to be super boring from a close standpoint. It's not going to be close. Notre Dame is going to get crushed. They're losing their head coach. If they make the playoffs, they're not going to beat anyone. But I'm just saying it. Notre Dame can still make the playoffs. Scenario number 11. Georgia wins the SEC. Michigan wins the Big Ten. Houston wins the American. Oklahoma State wins the Big 12. And again, in this scenario, it stays really the same. Georgia's 1 seed. Michigan is a 2 seed. That is the thing that most people expect to happen. Oklahoma State would get that 3 seed spot over Cincinnati because, again, Cincinnati would lose. Oklahoma State would be bumped up 1. And I think Houston, again, I'm saying it. I think a lot of scenarios, Houston makes these playoffs. Houston makes it as the 4 seed. And if you want, you can go back and again hear my explanation of why I think Houston should make it ahead of a lot of other teams. But Houston's a good football team. I think Houston makes the playoffs if certain things work out. I mean, I have them in about a quarter of these playoff scenarios. So, I mean, you're hearing the word Houston a lot, and it's because I legitimately do believe they have a path to the playoffs. Again, they don't hold their own fate, but at least they hold part of their fate. Actually, they do hold their own fate in my scenarios. Actually, that's not true. They don't hold their fate. They need Georgia to beat Alabama. Or I would beat Michigan. And at least one of these scenarios needs to play out for... You need Georgia to beat Alabama. That's the real thing if you're Houston now. Scenario number 12. Georgia wins the SEC. Michigan wins the Big Ten. Cincinnati wins the American. And Baylor wins the Big 12. So in this scenario, you get Georgia. This would be the obvious playoff scenario of the top 3, Georgia, Michigan, Cincinnati. The only difference is instead of Oklahoma State getting kicked out because of the Big 12 championship, you get Notre Dame in again for this one. So that moves us on to scenario 13. Don't worry, guys. I don't have that many left. There are only 20 scenarios, so only about 8 more to go through. Scenario number 13, we get Georgia wins this one. Georgia wins the SEC. Iowa wins the Big Ten. Houston wins the American. Oklahoma State wins the Big 12. In this scenario, this is about the highest Oklahoma State can ever get, and they're the 2 seed. Again, there's not a huge difference between 2 and 3 seed. Again, it's not an awesome playoff format that I want, where home field advantages come into play. So 2 seeds and 3 seeds really do not matter. There is no difference between being one of these teams. But you obviously do not want to be the 4 seed because then you have to play the 1 seed. So, I mean, again, This is the highest Oklahoma State can get, though, in my opinion. The Georgia 1 seed, Oklahoma State 2 seed. Houston would take the 3 seed, and then Cincy would take the 4. And we'd end up getting a Houston-Oklahoma State game, which would be sort of fun. I don't know. I would find it a lot of fun. Houston's been playing some pretty good football this year, and it really kind of showed you if the American can compete. And then also, you get to see Cincinnati play Georgia, and you could. I mean, that was the bowl game last year. What was that? That was the Peach Bowl. Was it the Peach Bowl? I want to say the Peach Bowl. I want to say it was the Peach Bowl. I think it was. But that was a fun game last year. I thought Cincinnati was going to pull out. They honestly should have pulled it out. They can compete with Georgia. They showed that last year. I think that'd be a lot of fun playoff scenario. Scenario number 14. This is where things get really, really weird. Georgia wins the SEC. Iowa wins the Big Ten. Cincinnati wins the American. Baylor wins the Big 12. Oregon wins the Pac-12. And Pitt wins the ACC. In this scenario, the top 3 are pretty obvious. Georgia gets the 1 seed. Cincy gets the 2 seed. Notre Dame gets the 3 seed. The only real question here that I find is so fascinating is who would get the 4 seed. And I think I couldn't pick, right? I could not pick who would win it. There is so many. I think there is a legitimate argument to be made for Iowa, Baylor, Oregon, or Pitt. These would all be 2-loss conference champions. Again, I don't think Ohio State could make it, obviously. I don't think teams that are outside of the championship can make it right now. I just don't think it's a possibility. You would take a 2-loss conference champion over a 2-loss team that didn't make the conference championship any day of the week. Also, same thing, if you lose your conference championship outside of Georgia, you are out because you would be a 2-loss team, and there would be a 2-loss conference champion. So, you don't, I mean, obviously, you take the 2-loss conference champion, it's not all that close. So, I don't know, let me know in the comment section below for scenario 14. Who do you think would make it in the scenario? Iowa, Baylor, Oregon, or Pitt? I don't think the scenario is going to happen, but I do think it's an interesting one. Scenario number 15, it's the exact same scenario as before, except for instead of Pitt wins, Wake Forest wins, and so instead of replace Wake Forest, the 4 seed could be Iowa, Baylor, Oregon, Wake Forest. There's a reason I have slashes here. It's because I could not make up my mind either. I would be leaning more towards Baylor to make it, but then I would also have a legitimate argument saying that they beat the number 2 team in the entire country in the conference championship, and I think you can make a legitimate case for Oregon saying they beat Ohio State. That's a huge win on their resume. But I think the loss to Stanford might keep them out, but everyone else has a kind of bad loss. Baylor lost to TCU. That's not a good loss to have on your resume. Iowa lost badly to Purdue. Wake Forest lost to UNC. I mean, all these teams have losses on their resume that obviously are not good quality losses, which is why I'm so torn. Oregon is, again, already in the top 10. Wake Forest, obviously, and Pitt both have an uphill battle to climb. But I feel like if one of them blows out the other, then you have a legitimate case to be made there, too. These scenarios are really interesting, in my opinion. So scenario 16 is a little bit more interesting. Obviously, Georgia wins the SEC. Iowa wins the Big Ten. Cincinnati wins the American. Baylor wins the Big 12. Utah wins the Pac-12. And Pitt wins the ACC. The only thing that changes here is, obviously, Georgia 1 seed, Cincy 2 seed, Notre Dame 3 seed. The only thing that changes is, again, Oregon would be out. They would have no shot if they lose to Utah. And again, Utah's a 3-loss team, so they have absolutely zero chance. Iowa, it would be between Iowa, Baylor, and Pitt. Would be the 4-seed conversation here. And I think then scenario 17 is the same thing except for Wake Forest beats Pitt in this scenario. And again, I can't make up my mind. Let me know in the comment section below who you think would make it. But I couldn't do it. I could not figure out who I thought would win this one. Scenario 18, Georgia wins. No, wait. This is a not good scenario. I don't think I did the math here. Scenario 18 is out. It's not a good scenario, and I refuse to admit it as a scenario. Scenario 19, we're skipping to Georgia wins this one. Wins the SEC. Michigan wins the Big 10. Houston wins the American. Baylor wins the Big 12. Again, the only scenarios you would want if you're if you're Iowa or Baylor, right, both of those teams, you need the other to win, right? If you're Iowa, you're obviously rooting for Baylor so you can make it an argument. You need Cincy to win, obviously, so you can keep Houston out of the playoffs, and you need Georgia to beat Alabama so you can keep Alabama out of the playoffs. Those are the things you need to happen if you're an Iowa fan or a Baylor fan, by the way. Just wanted to let you know. Because I went over all, I guess, 19 scenarios at this point, but all really the scenarios, and the only ones where Iowa, Baylor, or Pitt, or Oregon have chances are in 1, 2, 3, 4. There's only 4 scenarios out of the 19 where you even have an argument to be made, right? So it's really kind of interesting here. There's only 4 scenarios where you even have a shot. So, I mean, again, you got to root for certain things to happen if you're Iowa and Baylor fans. But scenario 19, again, Iowa, Baylor would have no chance of playoffs. You would have a Georgia as the 1 seed, Michigan as the 2 seed, Houston as the 3 seed, Cincy as the 4 seed. And then finally, in the last scenario, absolute chaos occurs. Georgia wins the SEC, Iowa wins the Big Ten, Houston wins the American, Baylor wins the Big 12. And in this scenario, we end up getting 3 teams that aren't exactly Power 5 football teams. You end up getting Georgia as the 1 seed, Houston as the 2 seed, Cincy as the 3 seed, Notre Dame as the 4 seed. Anyways, those are my playoff predictions. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, whether you agree or disagree with those picks down there. Let me know if you are any of these teams that if you really like. If you're a fan of any of these teams, because they're dream seasons for a lot of teams that could come true or come crashing down tomorrow. So let me know in the comment section below what you guys think. But here it is, GGB saying like and subscribe, and adios amigos.